The wind howled through the city like a wild animal, carrying sharp pieces of snow that danced under the dim streetlights. It was one of the coldest nights of the year. The roads were almost empty except for a few cars moving slowly through the thick white snow. Inside one of those cars sat Ethan Hale, a billionaire known for his success, power, and cold attitude toward the world. He was returning from a late business meeting, his black luxury car cutting through the frozen streets like a shadow. The heater hummed softly, filling the car with warmth, but Ethan's heart felt strangely heavy that night. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the loneliness that always followed him home. He turned down a narrow street that led to the highway when something caught his eye, a small figure sitting by the bus stop. At first he thought it was just a pile of snow, but when his headlights moved closer he saw movement. A woman. She was sitting on the icy bench holding something in her arms. No, two tiny bundles wrapped in thin faded blankets. Ethan slowed the car. The sight made his chest tighten. The woman's face was hidden under a torn hood, but her shoulders were shaking. The babies, he realized they were babies, were crying weakly, their small sounds lost in the wind. Without thinking, Ethan stopped the car. For a moment he just sat there, gripping the steering wheel. He wasn't a man who often stopped for strangers. His life was built around walls, security gates, expensive suits, and people who bowed when he entered a room. But something about that woman pulled him out of his world. Something in her pain called to the small piece of humanity still alive inside him. He stepped out. The freezing air hit him instantly, burning his face. The snow crunched under his polished shoes as he walked toward her. "Hey," he said softly, but his voice was almost lost in the wind. "Are you okay?" The woman lifted her head slowly. Her eyes met his, dark, tired, and full of fear. She looked young, maybe in her late 20s. Her lips were pale and her cheeks were red from the cold. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking. The bus didn't come. It's been hours. Ethan looked at the babies. Their little faces were red, their hands trembling even inside the blankets. He could see the frost forming on their clothes. "You can't stay here," he said quickly. "You'll freeze." She looked away, unsure if she could trust him. Her arms tightened around the twins. I don't have anywhere to go," she said quietly. Ethan hesitated. He didn't usually let people into his personal life, but something told him he couldn't walk away. "I live nearby," he said firmly. "You and your babies can come with me. It's warm there." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You don't even know me," she whispered. He gave a small smile, though it barely showed on his serious face. "I don't need to. I just know you need help." For a moment, the woman didn't move. Then, with slow and trembling steps, she nodded. Ethan took off his thick wool coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It almost swallowed her completely, but the warmth made her sigh with relief. He helped her into the car, carefully making sure the babies were safe in the back seat. Their little cries softened once the heat filled the space. Ethan closed the door and sat behind the wheel again. The woman sat silently beside him, her head leaning against the window. As he drove, Ethan glanced at her reflection in the glass. She looked broken, like someone who had carried too much pain for too long. Her fingers were red and cut from the cold, and her eyes carried a sadness deeper than any winter night. He didn't ask questions yet. He didn't need to. He just drove through the storm, the headlights cutting through the snow. After a few minutes, he said quietly, "What's your name?" She hesitated before whispering, "Maria." "Maria," he repeated softly as if testing the name. "And the babies?" Her lips curved slightly for the first time that night. "Elijah and Emma," she said. "They're only 6 months old." Ethan nodded. He could hear the love in her voice, but also fear. He wanted to ask more, where she was going, what had happened, but something told him to wait. When they finally reached his mansion, the tall gates opened automatically. The woman looked out the window, her eyes wide at the sight. The lights, the guards, the huge doors, it all looked unreal to someone who had just been sitting in the snow. The car stopped near the entrance. Ethan turned to her. "You're safe now," he said simply. She looked at him, tears forming in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Ethan nodded, not sure what to say. But as he helped her out and saw her clutch her babies tightly against her chest, he felt something change inside him. That night, under the falling snow, the billionaire who thought he had everything realized he had been missing the one thing money could never buy: the warmth of compassion. and he had no idea that bringing Maria into his home would soon change both their lives. Forever. The warmth inside the mansion felt almost unreal after the freezing night. The tall golden lights, the soft carpets, the smell of wood and clean air. Everything seemed to come from another world. Maria stood quietly near the door, her eyes moving around in disbelief. She was holding her babies close, afraid someone might take them away. Ethan spoke softly to his housekeeper, Mrs. Lena. "Prepare a guest room. Get some blankets, milk for the babies, and hot soup." Mrs. Lena looked shocked. "Sir, who is she?" she whispered. Ethan only said, "Someone who needs help." His voice was firm, and that was enough. Maria didn't say a word as Mrs. Lena led her up the wide staircase. Her legs shook with every step. The lights felt too bright. The walls looked too perfect. She kept her eyes down, afraid to leave any mark or make any sound. When they reached the guest room, it was warm and full of soft colors. A fire burned quietly in the corner, and the sound of it made her eyes fill with tears. She laid the babies on the bed and covered them carefully. They were sleeping at last, their tiny faces peaceful. Mrs. Lena brought her a towel and a long robe. "You must be cold," she said kindly. "There's a bathroom through that door. Take your time." Maria nodded, her voice too weak to reply. When she closed the bathroom door, she finally looked at herself in the mirror. Her face was pale, her hair wet and tangled, her eyes red. For a long moment, she just stared. It felt like looking at a stranger. Later, when she came out, Ethan was waiting by the door. He had changed into a simple sweater, not his usual suit. He gave her a calm smile. "How are the babies?" "They're asleep," she said softly. "Good," he said. "You should eat something too." Maria sat carefully on the edge of a chair. She kept her hands folded tightly, like she was afraid to touch anything. Ethan placed a bowl of soup in front of her. Steam rose slowly, warming her face. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "You don't have to thank me." For a few minutes, silence filled the room, only the crackling fire and the quiet breathing of the twins. Ethan watched her with gentle curiosity. Her eyes avoided his, but he could see they carried a story she wasn't ready to tell yet. After finishing the soup, Maria looked around nervously. "I can clean this," she said, reaching for the bowl. Ethan stopped her softly. "No, you're a guest here, not a worker." Her hands froze in the air. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "It's just, I'm used to it," he smiled faintly. "Then it's time to get used to something better." She looked confused. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. She wanted to believe him, but the fear inside her was too deep. Ethan stood up and said gently, "You can stay here as long as you need. You and your children are safe." Maria nodded slowly, tears forming again. "You're very kind, sir. I won't cause trouble. I promise." Ethan gave her a long look. "You don't have to promise anything," he said quietly. "Just rest." That night, while everyone in the mansion slept, Ethan stayed awake in his study. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman and her babies. Who was she? Why was she out there in the storm? Why did she look so frightened when he spoke kindly? He walked to the window. The snow was still falling softly outside, covering the garden in white. In his entire life, he had met hundreds of people. Powerful men, rich women, leaders, and liars. But no one had ever looked at him the way Maria did, as if kindness was something rare and dangerous. In the guest room, Maria couldn't sleep either. The bed was too soft, the air too warm. She kept waking up, afraid that someone might walk in and tell her to leave. She looked at her twins sleeping peacefully and touched their tiny hands. "Everything will be okay," she whispered, though she wasn't sure she believed it. She thought of the life she had left behind, the place she escaped from, the shouting, the pain, the endless fear. She closed her eyes and promised herself never to go back. When morning came, sunlight filled the room. It was the first time in months Maria had slept without hearing doors slam or people yell. She looked around and felt a strange peace. Maybe this place could be a new beginning. Downstairs, Ethan sat at the breakfast table reading the newspaper, but his thoughts were far away. When Maria entered, holding one baby while the other slept in her arms, he looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she gave a shy nod. "Morning, sir." He noticed how she still stood near the door, not daring to sit until he asked. "Please join me," he said warmly. "You can eat here," Maria hesitated. "I don't want to bother you." "You're not," he said simply. "You and your children are part of this house now." Her eyes softened at his words. For the first time she smiled, a small, gentle smile that reached her tired eyes. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that small smile was the start of something that would soon change his quiet mansion into a home filled with new warmth and life. And as Maria looked out the tall glass window at the bright morning sun melting the snow, she whispered a silent prayer of thanks. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid to hope. The next few days passed quietly in the large mansion. Snow still covered the city outside, but inside everything felt calm and safe. The warmth of the fire, the smell of food, and the soft laughter of the babies brought life to the house. Maria spent most of her time in the guest room, taking care of her twins. Ethan noticed how she always kept the room clean and organized, even though no one asked her to. She folded the blankets neatly, polished the small table, and even swept the floor. She said little, but her actions spoke of a woman who had worked hard all her life. Ethan often watched from a distance. He admired the care she gave to her children and the quiet strength in her eyes. There was something about her that made him curious. He wanted to know her story, but he didn't want to scare her by asking too soon. One morning, while Ethan was reading in his study, Maria softly knocked on the door. "Sir?" she said, standing shyly at the entrance. "Can I help with something? Maybe clean the kitchen or the floors?" Ethan put down his book and smiled. "Maria, you don't have to work here," he said gently. "You're my guest." She lowered her head. "I don't like sitting without doing anything." "It feels wrong," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "All right. If it makes you comfortable, you can help Mrs. Lena with the housework, but only if you want to." A small smile appeared on her face. "Thank you, sir." Later that day, Maria stood in the large kitchen beside Mrs. Lena, washing dishes. The housekeeper watched her carefully. "You're a quiet one," Mrs. Lena said kindly, "but I can see you're a hard worker." Maria smiled faintly. "It's what I know best," she said. When the twins started crying from the next room, Maria quickly wiped her hands and went to them. She held them close, rocking them gently. Her eyes softened as she hummed a small tune. Mrs. Lena watched from the doorway and sighed. "That woman has been through something," she thought. That evening, Ethan joined them for dinner. Maria sat at the far end of the table, her head bowed. The twins were sleeping nearby in small cribs. Ethan spoke casually, trying to make her feel comfortable. "So how are the little ones today?" "They're good," she said softly. "They sleep more now. They like the warmth." "I can imagine," Ethan said with a smile. "After the storm, they deserve all the warmth in the world." Maria looked down, her fingers tightening around her spoon. The word storm seemed to touch something deep inside her. Ethan noticed the change in her face. "Maria," he said carefully, "you don't have to tell me anything. But if you ever feel like talking, I'll listen." For a moment, silence filled the room. The sound of the fire flickering was the only thing between them. Then slowly, Maria lifted her eyes. "I used to work for a family," she began softly. "They had everything, money, cars, a big house. I was their maid." Ethan nodded quietly, letting her continue. "They said they would pay me well, but when I arrived, everything changed. I worked from dawn till night. I wasn't allowed to rest. I wasn't allowed to go out. And when I became pregnant," she paused, her voice trembling, "they said I had no right to have children. They said I had no place in their world." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You mean they treated you badly because of that?" Maria nodded. "Yes. I begged them to let me go, but they wouldn't. So one night, when the babies were sick and crying, I ran away. I didn't take money, clothes, anything, just them. I ran into the snow because it was better than staying." Her voice broke and she looked down, tears falling quietly. "I thought we would die that night," she whispered. Ethan felt a heavy ache in his chest. He wanted to say something, but words seemed too small. Instead, he stood up and placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "You don't have to be afraid anymore," he said softly. "You and your children are safe here. No one will hurt you again." Maria nodded, wiping her tears. "Thank you, sir. You saved our lives," he smiled faintly. "Maybe you saved mine too," he said quietly, almost to himself. That night, after Maria put her twins to sleep, she stood by the window looking out at the snow. It was still falling gently, but she didn't feel afraid anymore. The house was warm, and for the first time in years, she didn't have to look over her shoulder. Downstairs, Ethan sat alone in the living room, thinking about everything she had said. He realized that he had lived in comfort for so long, but he had never known what real strength looked like. Until now. He looked at the fire and thought, maybe helping her wasn't an accident. Maybe it was meant to happen. The next morning, Maria woke up to laughter. Her babies were smiling in their crib, playing with the small toys Ethan had bought for them. She felt a tear slip down her cheek, but this time it was a tear of joy. She whispered softly to them, "Everything will be different now." And as sunlight poured through the window, lighting up the room, it felt as if the cold past was slowly melting away, replaced by the promise of something new, something kind, something finally safe. The days inside the mansion grew calmer, filled with the soft laughter of Maria's twins and the quiet comfort of a peaceful home. Yet behind the warmth, something still felt heavy in the air, a shadow from Maria's past that hadn't fully faded. Ethan could sense it. Maria had become a part of the household. She helped Mrs. Lena with the cleaning, cooked small meals, and sometimes read bedtime stories to the twins. Everyone in the house liked her kindness and her gentle nature. But at night, when the world was quiet, she would sit by the window with tears in her eyes, lost in thoughts no one else could see. One morning, Ethan found her outside in the garden. The snow had started melting and she was hanging small clothes on a line. The twins were asleep in their carriage beside her. The sunlight touched her face, and for a moment she looked peaceful, until she noticed him watching. "Good morning, Maria," Ethan said, stepping closer. "You're up early," she smiled softly. "Old habits, sir. I always woke up before sunrise. It feels strange to sleep longer." Ethan nodded. "You don't have to call me sir, you know." Maria looked down shyly. "It's just hard to forget the old way," he smiled. "Then maybe it's time to start learning a new way." Her smile faded a little. "It's not easy to forget where I came from." Ethan's eyes softened. "You don't have to forget. But you also don't have to keep living in fear." Maria looked away, blinking back tears. "Sometimes I wake up at night thinking someone will come for us. That they'll find us. Who?" Ethan asked gently. Maria didn't answer right away. "The people I worked for," she said finally. "They were powerful. And cruel. They don't like when someone leaves them." Ethan frowned. "You think they're looking for you?" "I know they are," she whispered. "They always get what they want." Ethan stood silently for a moment. He wanted to tell her she was safe, but deep inside, he knew power could reach far. Still, he wasn't about to let anyone harm her again. "Maria," he said firmly, "this house is protected. You're under my roof now. No one can touch you or your children here." Maria looked at him, her eyes wide. "Why are you helping me so much? You don't even know me." Ethan's expression softened. "Maybe because no one helped me once when I needed it most," he said quietly. "Everyone deserves a second chance." That night, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what she said. He searched online, typing her name, Maria Brooks, Prague, into the news. The moment the results appeared, his heart sank. The headline read, "Young maid missing from wealthy estate. Family denies allegations of mistreatment." He clicked the article. It mentioned her former employers, the Winston family, one of the richest families in the neighboring city. They claimed Maria had stolen valuables and fled with twin infants. Ethan's eyes darkened. He knew that kind of story, one written by the powerful to hide their sins. He leaned back in his chair, angry but calm. "So that's what she ran from," he muttered. "They hurt her, and then they blamed her." The next morning, Maria entered the kitchen with her twins, unaware of what Ethan had discovered. She looked brighter than usual. "They slept all night," she said with a smile. "It's the first time since the storm." Ethan smiled back, though his eyes carried concern. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve some peace," she nodded, sitting by the table. But as she reached for the milk bottle, her hand trembled. The bottle slipped and crashed to the floor. The sound made her flinch hard, too hard. She covered her face with both hands, whispering, I'm sorry. Mrs. Lena rushed over, shocked. "Maria, it's fine. It's just a bottle." Ethan walked closer. "Hey," he said softly. "You're safe. No one's angry." She looked up, tears in her eyes. "I thought," she began, but her voice broke. "You thought someone would punish you," Ethan said gently. "Did they used to do that?" Maria nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "If I broke anything, they said I was useless. Sometimes they—" She stopped, unable to continue. Ethan's heart tightened. He knelt down beside her and said, "Listen to me. No one here will ever hurt you again. You don't have to be afraid, not even for a second." Maria nodded weakly. She wanted to believe him. And for the first time, maybe she did. That evening, Ethan made a quiet decision. He called his lawyer and said, "I need help protecting someone. A woman and her 2 children. There's a family trying to ruin her name. I want the truth found." The lawyer agreed to begin right away. Later, Ethan went to check on Maria. She was sitting on the floor beside the twins' crib, humming softly. The babies were asleep, their tiny hands holding each other. Ethan leaned on the doorframe, watching the gentle scene. When she noticed him, she smiled nervously. "Sorry, I didn't hear you." "You don't have to apologize for being a mother," he said warmly. "They're lucky to have you." Maria looked at her babies and whispered, "I just want them to have a life without fear." "You will," Ethan promised. "Both of you." As the night deepened, snow began to fall again outside. Ethan stood by his window looking at the dark sky. He didn't know how far Maria's enemies might go, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let her face them alone. Somewhere in another city, the Winston family sat in their warm mansion, discussing the maid who had disappeared. They didn't know yet that the truth about them was about to come to light, and that a billionaire named Ethan Hale was about to become the one person they could never silence. And for the first time in years, Maria slept peacefully, unaware that her past was slowly catching up. But this time she wasn't running anymore. She had someone who would stand beside her. The next few days moved quietly, but a feeling of unease began to grow inside Ethan's mansion. Maria could sense it, even though no one said anything. She noticed Ethan often stood by the window late at night, talking on his phone in a serious voice. Sometimes, when she entered the room, he would quickly end the call and smile like nothing was wrong. Maria knew he was trying to protect her, but part of her feared that her past had already found its way back. One cold morning, as the sun hid behind thick clouds, the sound of a car echoed through the long driveway. Mrs. Lena peeked out the window and frowned. "Strange," she murmured. "We're not expecting anyone." Ethan walked in just as a black car stopped at the gate. 2 men in formal coats stepped out, their expressions cold and strict. "Who are they?" Maria asked quietly, clutching her twins close. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Stay here," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, don't open the door." He walked outside to meet them. The wind was biting cold, but his voice was calm. "Can I help you?" he asked. The taller man pulled out a photo, one it was of Maria, taken from a distance. "We're private investigators," he said. "We've been hired to find this woman. She's accused of theft from the Winston family. We have reason to believe she's here." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You're mistaken," he said flatly. "There's no one by that name here." The man smirked. "You sure, Mr. Hale? Because we have witnesses who saw her enter your house the night of the snowstorm." Ethan's eyes turned sharp. "Then tell your witnesses to stay off my property," he said. "Now leave before I call my security team." The men exchanged looks but finally stepped back toward their car. "We'll be back," one said, voice full of warning. Ethan waited until the gates closed before he exhaled deeply. His hands were tight fists. Inside, Maria was waiting in the hallway, her eyes full of fear. "They were looking for me, weren't they?" she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, but I didn't let them in." Her face turned pale. "They won't stop. They'll come again." Ethan stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then we'll be ready next time. You're not alone anymore, Maria." Her eyes filled with tears. "They'll ruin your name too, sir. You shouldn't have to suffer because of me." Ethan shook his head. "I don't care what they say. You and those children deserve peace. I'll protect that no matter what it costs." Later that night, Maria couldn't sleep. The sound of the wind outside reminded her of the night she had run away. She sat beside her sleeping twins, her mind full of painful memories. She remembered the Winston mansion, the endless rooms, the loud orders, the way everyone treated her like she was invisible. She had worked there since she was young, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of other people's children while no one ever asked about her own dreams. Then she remembered him, Mr. Winston, a man with wealth but no heart. He shouted often, threw things when angry, and blamed her for every mistake in the house. When she became pregnant, the humiliation began. "A maid with children?" he had said with disgust. "Do you think you belong here anymore?" She remembered crying in secret, hiding in the small servant's room, promising her unborn babies that one day she would take them somewhere safe. That promise kept her alive. And on that snowy night, when she finally found the courage, she wrapped her newborn twins in blankets and slipped out through the kitchen door. The snow had been deep, the road dark, and her body weak, but her will was strong. She walked for hours, her feet numb, her vision blurred. When she finally collapsed near the bus stop, she thought it was the end. But then headlights cut through the storm, and that was the moment Ethan found her. Back in the present, Maria wiped her tears. She looked at her babies and whispered, "Mama won't let them take you. Never again." The next morning, she found Ethan in his study reading documents. "Sir," she said softly, "maybe it's better if we leave. I don't want to bring trouble to your door." Ethan looked up, his expression calm but firm. "No one is leaving. You're safe here, Maria. I've already spoken to my lawyer. We're preparing your case. The truth will come out soon." "But they have power," she said quietly. "They can make lies sound true?" He nodded. "Then we'll make the truth louder." She looked at him with silent gratitude. No one had ever stood up for her before. That afternoon, Ethan's lawyer arrived with files. "We found something," he said. "The Winston family never filed any real theft report. Their story is fake. We also have witnesses who say Maria was mistreated and unpaid." Ethan smiled slightly. "Then we'll expose them." When Maria heard the news, she broke down in tears. "You didn't have to do all this for me," she said. Ethan looked at her with gentle eyes. "You deserve justice, Maria. Everyone does." That night, as snow fell softly outside once again, Maria stood by the window holding her twins. The fear inside her heart began to fade, replaced by something warm, hope. She turned to see Ethan standing nearby, watching the children with a small smile. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded quietly. "You don't need to thank me. Just promise me one thing." "What is it?" she asked. "Never run again," he said softly. "You don't have to anymore." Maria looked at him for a long moment, her eyes shining with tears. "I promise," she whispered. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside the mansion there was peace. The same woman who once ran barefoot through the storm now stood under a safe roof, holding her babies close, no longer a runaway, no longer a victim. And Ethan, who once lived only for business and money, felt something new growing in his heart, a purpose beyond wealth. He didn't know it yet, but saving Maria would soon become the greatest change of his life. The heavy days slowly turned into brighter ones. The snow outside began to melt, revealing green patches of grass under the morning sun. The mansion, once silent and cold, was now filled with the soft sound of laughter and the gentle cries of babies. Maria's twins had grown stronger. They crawled on the living room carpet, their tiny hands reaching for toys Ethan had bought. Their giggles echoed through the hallways, bringing life to every corner. Even the house staff, who had once walked quietly, now smiled when they passed by. Maria stood near the window, watching them with soft eyes. Her face, once pale with fear, now glowed with peace, but deep inside she still felt uncertain. She wondered what would happen once everything was settled. Would she have to leave? Would Ethan forget her once the case was over? She didn't know, but for now she was grateful. Grateful for warmth, for safety, for kindness. One morning, Ethan entered the dining hall and found Maria already setting the table. She had placed fresh flowers in a vase and arranged breakfast neatly. "Maria," he said with a gentle smile, "you don't have to do all this." She smiled shyly. "I like doing it. It makes me feel useful." Ethan nodded. "Well, then you're doing it perfectly." She looked down, hiding a small blush. "Thank you, sir." He paused. "You still call me sir, even after all these months," he said playfully. Her eyes widened slightly. I'm sorry. Habit, I guess." He laughed softly. "It's fine, Maria, but maybe one day you'll just call me Ethan." For a moment, their eyes met. There was silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was warm, gentle, and full of unspoken emotions neither of them dared to name. Later that day, Ethan's lawyer returned with papers. "It's done," he announced proudly. "The Winston family has dropped all false claims. We found solid proof of their mistreatment of staff. They'll stay quiet now." Maria froze, her hand covering her mouth. "Are you serious?" Ethan nodded. "You're free, Maria, completely free." Her knees weakened and she sat down slowly, tears falling down her cheeks. "I never thought I'd hear those words," she whispered. "Free. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder gently. It's over now. You can start again, however you want. She looked at him through her tears. I don't even know where to start. I've only ever worked. I don't know how to live any other way. Ethan smiled softly. Then let's figure it out together. A few weeks passed. Maria began taking lessons from Mrs. Lena, learning new things from managing house accounts to organizing events. Ethan wanted her to learn not as a maid but as a manager. Maria, he said one afternoon, you have a gift for order and care. I want you to work here, officially, as the household manager. Full pay, full respect. Maria's eyes widened. You mean, I'll be part of your staff? He shook his head with a smile. No, you'll be part of my team. She stood quietly, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say, she whispered. Say yes, he said gently. She smiled through tears. Then yes. From that day, Maria worked not as a maid, but as a trusted member of the household. She managed everything with calm grace, arranging schedules, supervising staff, and even handling guests. The mansion ran smoother than ever before, and every time Ethan saw her walking down the hall with her twins in her arms, he felt something in his heart he couldn't explain. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was part of his life. One afternoon, while Maria was organizing the garden with the twins playing nearby, Ethan joined her. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of flowers. They seem happy, Ethan said, nodding toward the babies. Maria smiled. They love being outside. I think they've never seen so many colors before. Ethan chuckled softly. Neither have I, to be honest. She looked at him curiously. You've lived here for years. Yes, he said, but it always felt empty. Now it feels alive. Her cheeks turned pink. You're too kind, sir. I mean, Ethan. He smiled at the way she corrected herself. There it is. He teased gently. Maria laughed softly, and for the first time her laughter was carefree, light and full of life. As weeks turned into months, Maria changed more and more. She stood taller, spoke with confidence, and smiled often. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by quiet strength. Ethan admired her resilience. One evening, when the sky turned orange with sunset, Ethan stood on the balcony watching the horizon. Maria came beside him, holding a cup of tea. You've done so much for me, she said softly. I still don't understand why. Ethan looked at her. Because you remind me that money means nothing if it can't help someone who needs it. She lowered her gaze. You gave me back my life, he smiled gently. You rebuilt it yourself, Maria. I just gave you the chance. They stood in silence, side by side, as the sun dipped below the hills. The twins' laughter floated from the garden below, filling the air with warmth. That night, when Maria tucked her babies into bed, she looked at their peaceful faces and whispered, We're finally home. She knew life wasn't perfect yet, but for the first time it was hers. She was no longer running. She was building something new, something beautiful. And in another room, Ethan watched the light under her door fade, smiling quietly to himself. He didn't know what the future would bring, but one thing was certain. The woman he had found crying in the snow had not only changed her fate, but his as well. A full year had passed since that freezing night when Ethan found Maria and her babies by the road. The mansion, once silent and cold, now overflowed with life. Every morning, laughter echoed through the halls. The twins, Elijah and Emma, had grown into bright, cheerful toddlers who filled every corner with joy. Maria had changed too. The shy, frightened woman who once hid behind tears was now confident, graceful, and full of light. She managed the house with calm skill and kindness, and everyone admired her. Yet even after everything, she never forgot the night that changed her life, the night she met Ethan in the snowstorm. One late afternoon, snow began to fall again, just like it had a year ago. Maria stood by the large window, watching white flakes swirl through the air. The memory came back vividly, the cold, the fear, the moment she thought her babies would die. But instead of pain, she now felt gratitude. Ethan entered the room quietly and stood beside her. You're thinking about that night, aren't you? He asked softly. She nodded. Yes, I still remember how heavy the snow was. I thought no one would ever stop. Ethan smiled gently. Maybe I was meant to drive down that road that night. Maria looked at him, her eyes warm. Maybe we were both meant to meet, she said quietly. For a moment, silence filled the room. but it was a peaceful silence, the kind that spoke of deep understanding. Later that evening, the mansion was glowing with soft light. Ethan had asked everyone to gather in the main hall. A large cake sat on the table, surrounded by flowers and candles. Maria walked in with the twins, confused but smiling. "What is all this?" she asked, surprised. Ethan grinned. "It's a celebration. 1 year ago today, you and the little ones came into this house, and my life hasn't been the same since." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She looked around at the smiling faces of the staff, the glowing candles, and the happy laughter of her children. "You didn't have to do all this," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Yes, I did. That night changed everything for me, too." The twins clapped their tiny hands, making everyone laugh. Maria picked them up, one on each arm, their little heads resting on her shoulders. "You see," Ethan said softly, "this house used to be just walls and rooms. Now it feels like a home." Maria smiled through her tears. "That's because you opened its doors. To us." When everyone had left and the night grew quiet, Maria stood outside on the balcony, holding a blanket around her shoulders. Snow covered the garden again, glittering under the moonlight. Ethan joined her, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. "You'll catch a cold," he said gently, handing her one. She smiled. "I used to hate the snow," she said softly. "Now it reminds me that miracles can happen anywhere." Ethan looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "You call it a miracle?" She nodded. "Yes, because that night I didn't just find shelter. I found kindness. I found hope," he smiled faintly. "And I found something too, Maria. You taught me what it means to care again." Maria turned her face toward him. "You've done more for me than I could ever repay." Ethan shook his head. "You already have. You brought light into my life." The wind brushed softly between them, carrying snowflakes through the air. Maria's eyes glistened. For a moment neither spoke, but their hearts said everything words couldn't. As days passed, the story of Maria's courage quietly spread. The Winston family, exposed for their cruelty, sold their estate and left the city. People who once looked down on her now admired her strength. But Maria never sought revenge. She only wanted peace. One morning, she was invited to speak at a charity event for women in need. Nervously, she stood before the small crowd, her voice trembling at first. "I was once afraid of the world," she said softly. "But someone taught me that kindness still exists. When I had nothing, a stranger opened his door and gave me a new start. I learned that sometimes hope arrives when you least expect it, like a warm light in a snowstorm." Her words touched every heart in the room. Ethan, sitting in the back row, smiled proudly. He had never seen her shine so brightly. That evening, as they returned home, Ethan walked beside her in the garden. The snow was falling again, soft and gentle. Maria carried her twins, who were laughing and reaching for the snowflakes. "They love the snow now," Ethan said with a laugh. Maria nodded. "Maybe because the snow gave us you." He stopped walking for a moment, watching her with quiet emotion. "No, Maria," he said softly. "The snow gave me you." She looked at him, her heart full. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the sound of falling snow and the warmth between them. Later that night, after putting the twins to bed, Maria stepped outside once more. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Thank you." The wind carried her words into the night. Behind her, Ethan appeared at the doorway. "Talking to the snow again?" he teased gently. She smiled. "Just saying thank you to life." He stepped closer, standing beside her. "Then let's thank it together." They stood side by side under the softly falling snow, 2 lives forever changed by one act of kindness. From that cold night of tears to this peaceful night of hope, their story had come full circle, a story of courage, compassion, and the power of humanity. And though the snow kept falling, it no longer brought fear or sadness. For Maria, Ethan, and the twins, every flake that touched the ground whispered the same message. You were saved for a reason.